Were you inspired by the climactic season finale of House of the Dragon? Before you just drag and drop that sequence into your campaign, I had a few reservations about that I would share with you in terms of D&D and potentially beyond. So let's talk about it. Before we go any further, huge spoiler alert. We will definitely be spoiling the climactic scene from House of the Dragon. So if you haven't watched the season finale yet, watch that, then come back and watch this. With that out of the way, the climactic scene I'm talking about, if you couldn't guess already, was the dragon on dragon aerial combat in which I'm terrible with the names of the different characters in this show, particularly the Targaryens, and white-haired, one-eyed Targaryen on some massive dragon takes out a younger, dark-haired Targaryen on a much smaller dragon. And it is a wonderful looking visual effects shot. There's all kinds of storming below and the blue sky above. And then out of this whole storm chaos comes this massive dragon, basically mouth first, and it just gobbles up the other dragon. Folks in the community have picked up on this and are rightfully delighted by the imagery, if one can be delighted by child-on-child violence. Though the white-haired Targaryen looks like he's about 40 years old and not, I think, 16 or whatever he's supposed to be in the story. But well, that's maybe a nitpick for another time. And folks are really excited by this, and I think it's energized folks to look at this idea of dragon-on-dragon combat and dragon riders and things of that sort. But I want to slow my roll on this a little bit, because there's a lot about that sequence that I thought they did not fit quite right. Made it feel a little bit cheap. And if there's one thing that really bothers me in terms of playing D&D, it's when you're in these moments and the dungeon master does something that feels cheap. So where to begin? The first part is the dark-haired Targaryen has gone to the House of Baratheon to remind the Baratheon lord where their allegiance lies. But unfortunately, 40-year-old, 16-year-old, white-haired, one-eyed Targaryen was there first, and there's some blah-de-blah, blue-de-blue. And basically, the Baratheon lord tells the young Targaryen, skedaddle, get out of here. Now, it's stormy, it's rainy. I mean, it's more than just a storm. I mean, this storm seems like of epic proportions. It looked like there was a hurricane blowing in, visibility up in the sky for nothing. And they've established this was they flew over there. It's raining heavily when it gets there. And when we leave, still raining heavily, goes over to his dragon, looks over the other dragon who they'd shown when he flew in. I guess they have dragon holding areas, almost like parking spots for your dragon, because the big dragon was on the other side of a wall, but there was plenty of room for this other dragon to come in and park in this other little courtyard area, which is actually where the front of the castle is. I'm not sure why the other dragon wasn't parked there, but that's another kind of nitpick, right? But anyway, when they arrive, big dragon's out there in the yard, looking mean, looking big, looking evil. When they come out, turns around, and he had just been ushered out. And white-haired, one-eyed Targaryen is in the hall, comes out, the big dragon's gone. Gone. We already see as an audience what's happening here. So then the young Targaryen gets on the dragon and gives him some encouragement, sort of reminding him, listen to me, obey me, sort of thing. They fly off, and then we get to the chase sequence. But my first problem is right here at the start. How did white-haired, one-eyed Targaryen guy race around? I mean, it had to have raced. We're led to believe, or we have to believe it's sort of implied, that as soon as dark-haired Targaryen turns around, white-haired, one-eyed Targaryen guy has to then run sprinting out of that hall, out of whichever side passages to some kind of side door to get to that dragon, and then get on the dragon, presumably has to give some kind of maybe similar speech, vault on. I mean, that dragon's huge. Just climbing up there would probably take a good minute or so. And it doesn't take a minute even for the dark-haired Targaryen boy to get outside and then lift off, flap their wings, gain flight, then gain altitude and just be gone. All this is done in like 20 seconds or whatever it takes for dark-haired Targaryen boy to get out there. Because as soon as he gets outside, looks around and the big dragon's completely gone. That's kind of cheapness, number one. I get it. They wanted to have this confrontation. But they found themselves in a spot. I feel like I can almost see that these creators are like GMs here. They want to have this cool spot, dragon on dragons in the air. But they realize that they've set up a scenario that makes this almost impossible to happen, or at least very difficult, because young boy's going out, his dragons are going to be up first, and then the big dragon's going to have to come out. It should, by all accounts, take the big dragon longer to just get up and get going. It's big. It's got a lot of mass. So they think, the boy's leaving. Oh gosh, we got to get this other dragon in the air. So woof, as they're narrating the player talking about them coming out of this courtyard in the rain, you look around and the other dragon's gone. So it helps me build for the moment, but it doesn't make sense. And as a player, I would be already ready to drop my BS flag because I could probably see this coming a mile away. I'd be rolling my eyes thinking like, oh great. I turn around, this guy's some kind of world-class sprinter. It's Usain Bolt with white hair and one eye racing out, then can do some kind of Superman jump to the top of their dragon, launch out, and be up and waiting for me in the sky. But that made me not even the maybe the most concerning part of this. So then young Targaryen gets on the smaller dragon, flaps their wings, does his little calming speech, gets up in the sky. It is roilingly bad weather. Seems like you can't see 20, 30, 40, 50 feet in front of you. So how are these guys staying within close contact? Now, I will grant you that maybe white-haired, one-eyed Targaryen guy knows full well where the other one's going. There's a lot of sky and a lot of direction. In this kind of weather, even if the young Targaryen boy knows exactly where he wants to go, how are they plotting this out? You can't see anything. You can't see the sun. You can't see any stars. You can't see any landmarks. They're up in the clouds. You can't see down below you to even follow the coastline. Whatever it is you would be doing, following a river to the coast, then turning south, north. I guess it would be north, I think, from this point to go. You can't see anything. So how are they finding each other? And they do this multiple times. There's a couple of little kind of mini encounters, and then I don't know if this was the dragon's idea or the boy's idea. If it was the boy's idea, it was indeed foolish. The boy flies in and burns the dragon's face and then flies off, and then this enrages the dragon. But the boy manages to get out of the cloud cover into the clear sky, and yet still seems to have no inkling of where this massive dragon is, and then that's where the big chomp happens. As a player, I'd be dropping my yellow challenge flags all over the field if this sequence happened to me. Now, if I was playing young Targaryen boy, I would not have tempted the fates and gone and burned that dragon. It did seem that what they're playing off of is this concept of some kind of dragon rage. The dragon gets angry, and then as a dragon rider, you lose control of what that dragon is doing, and which they show with the white-haired, one-eyed Targaryen trying to gain some kind of control of the dragon and not being able to do that. Can't stop the dragon from chasing. But it still leaves me a lot of questions of how exactly in all this horrible weather can this massive thing find this small thing unerringly, it seems like, and there not be any kind of opportunity or much opportunity really to be evaded. There's another thing I haven't mentioned yet. It's a game thing. It's a mechanical thing. This is something that comes up from time to time. I'm curious if this scene, and as it continues to penetrate the D&D community, it's going to resurface this concept of the 8 hit point dragon. I forget the exact number of hit points that this particular scenario has, but there's been a story that goes around about how in this game, I'm vastly simplifying and I'm missing some details. But the idea was that there was this heroic moment where a single person took down this dragon. And it's because the dragon only had 8 hit points. And this was some kind of rebuke of the D&D hit point system. And look, isn't this amazing? And I will admit that those kinds of heroic moments are really hard to do in D&D with the hit point system as they are. And that example, though, was clearly a player versus a monster. I think the implications of this scene is that it could be essentially player versus player, or the players are kind of on even playing field. It's basically two dragons. And in this case, either the large dragon does just a massive amount of hit points on a bite attack in the D&D sense, or the smaller dragon had 8 hit points or something similar to explain how this one bite attack just obliterated it completely. I wouldn't have a problem with that necessarily, but when you're putting the player on the side of being vulnerable to that sort of assault, in which you're basically saying this one hit is going to obliterate you, I think, especially if we're talking kind of a D&D 5th edition concept here, that would in play rub people the wrong way, even if in the fiction it makes sense. I don't think a lot of people would want their PC to go down on one bite from a dragon with all the other things in play to get here. Again, I'd be tossing my yellow flag and say, I'd really like to know how this happened because I'm trying like heck to evade it. I would feel like I have all the advantages in my corner. As far as I'm aware, they haven't demonstrated in the show that dragons have some kind of unerring sense of direction or some kind of wicked smell. And even then, you're in hurricane force storms. It seems like I would have felt that that would negate everything to the point that you're almost invisible to each other because you just can't see. This is a situation in which I would have thought both sides would have just missed each other in the night. It doesn't make for a great TV moment, but if I'm playing that character in the game, that's kind of what I'm counting on. So when you're adapting this from, ooh, isn't this a fun moment in the game, to a game situation, this kind of one-hit obliteration, what seems like a whole bunch of stuff that you had to really massage to get it to the place where you want it to be, I'm not sure is fulfilling from the players as maybe a GM would think it is. Now, granted, Dragonflight sounds like a lot of fun if you wanted to play a kind of Game of Thrones or Game of Thrones-y sort of game in which player characters are these few, the proud, the dragon riders. It seems great. Thinking about that and thinking about how to do different things with dragons, looking outside of the main D&D trope of dragons into dragons of a more animalistic sort, but that can be tamed and can be ridden and can form the backbone of a culture like this. It's really kind of fascinating. I think there's a lot to be done, but I would just be wary about taking this whole cloth and saying, oh yeah, let's just dump this in here. Because remember, in the fiction, the writers can basically invent whatever they want, even though sometimes I think the seams are showing, like when they decide to hurry people from place to place because it's convenient for them, or just make things happen, even though when you break it down and look at it, they don't make sense. But in a game, we're supposed to be relying on mechanics and roles and interaction between the players and the world. And this kind of moment really relies on the world doing a whole bunch of stuff that the player doesn't really have any control over to create this one cinematic piece. And I know for myself, if I was in the small Targaryen boys part of it in the cinematic piece, I would not be particularly happy or amazed by this. Now, if I were the white-haired, one-eye Targaryen character, maybe I would. Maybe it would seem super fitting that I was able to just gobble this thing up. And I guess that's maybe the last thing I'll say, just as an aside. I haven't been paying super close attention to the relative sizes of the dragons, but I knew that one dragon was big, was massive compared to the other ones. It seemed like the size changed. I don't know. Somebody let me know in the comments. Somebody break it down. I didn't feel like that dragon was that much bigger than the others. I knew it was bigger, a lot bigger, but it went from being like, wow, that's a huge dragon next to these other dragons, to this dragon must be, if that other dragon now is just barely bigger than the big dragon's mouth. Like, I didn't think it was that much bigger. So I felt like they played a little bit again with the sizing of things for this moment. But I wonder if I go back and look at it and look at some of the different scenes where they've shown those dragons next to each other, that the dragon doesn't come across as quite that massive. I think there are those scenes. I think Damon, one of Matt Smith of Doctor Who fame, is riding a smaller dragon next to that massive dragon. And yeah, there's a big size difference, but not that big. But maybe the small Targaryen boys dragon was one of the smaller ones. I don't know if they ever say it, but that's maybe another thing I would kind of nitpick. Anyhow, it was a really fun scene, a really great moment in terms of the fiction of the show. I'm really excited to see what folks take from this. It's interesting because I think this story is not new. I don't know if this moment took place in the story or if they made it up for the show. I think it's really fascinating how it's really these visual representations that are getting folks going in their brains. I mean, we've had dragon riding fiction before, the Dragon Riders of Pern from back in the day, though those were more like almost wyverns more than true dragons. So I'm really interested in how people are going to take this, but just slow your roll a bit and think about the interactions between the players and your creatures and NPCs and the world, because this could turn out into a moment that you think is going to be grand and amazing and cinematic in your head, but is nothing but a big bummer for your player. So just be warned, be careful, but let me know if you do end up using this. I'd love to hear what kind of scenarios or just different settings that maybe come out of this, or elements of settings that arise out of this. It's always fun when this stuff kind of hits the community and we see how everything works. But other than that, game on. I will talk to you later. Bye now.